So no matter how good someone is on the court or in the business world, they don't believe they've reached their full potential. They know that no matter how good they are, they can still get better. And that's a major driving force. And if you lack humility and you only have confidence, then you'll be closed off to feedback, to coaching, and ways to improve. If you only have humility and you have no confidence, then you won't have the requisite swagger to be really good at what you do. So it takes a marriage of the two.
We're all good. Okay, Alan, let's kick off. Firstly, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule once again to record with me after my laptop exploding last time. I really appreciate it, man, and I'm excited for this.
No, my pleasure. I'm excited as well. This will be fun.
Appreciate it, man. It shows a lot about you as well. That you let me kind of hop back on and do it again. So 2 weeks later, let's do it. So what I wanted to get into the beginning, was really about why do you do what you do? Because from your 2 books, you can really see a lot of your involvement in both the career aspect, the sport aspect. But why is it from your perspective you do what you do?
I've been a self-diagnosed quote nerd for my entire adult life. And one of my favorite quotes is also one of the mantras that I try to use to lead my life and to guide my life and my decision-making. And that is, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And ultimately, I see my work and my job as helping people light candles, to help people improve personally and professionally, to help people improve individually and organizationally. So most of my work centers on helping people improve their performance in a variety of different capacities. And I get a tremendous amount of fulfillment and satisfaction by doing that type of work. And it is incredibly meaningful to me to be able to share things that can have an impact on the way that somebody navigates this world. So, I did that for a while directly in the basketball space and had a very narrow market of who I was trying to help light candles with, basketball players and coaches. And that since kind of morphed and grown into what I do now, more on the corporate side.
How have you seen that shift from when you're in the basketball realm and you're putting a lot of time into your career there, and when you made the move over, like, was that a big change for yourself, even, from like a practical day-to-day perspective?
Yes and no. It certainly changed the day to day, because in my previous career, I was logging a lot of hours actually in the gym or in the weight room, hands-on with players, helping them improve their athleticism. Now, since most of my work is done on stage, giving keynotes and delivering workshops, the scene hours, if you will, are much smaller. I mean, I'm on stage for an hour, once or twice a week. But then there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into the behind the scenes, the unseen hours, and what I do to prepare for those different types of engagement. So the day-to-day has certainly shifted. There's a lot more travel involved in what I do now than what I was doing before. But as far as what I'm actually trying to accomplish, it's not that different. I still very much consider myself a performance coach. I know technically I'm a keynote speaker and an author, but the moniker that I most resonate with is coach. And really, the way I viewed it was I'm still a performance coach. I just switched audiences. My original audience were mostly youth and high school basketball players and coaches. And now I've switched, and my audience is primarily entrepreneurs and executives and sales professionals in the corporate world. So I'm still doing similar work. I'm just doing it in a different way into a different audience.
It's funny because you're almost like the athlete now who goes on road and shows up and has to perform. So I heard you speak on other podcasts too. You show up and you bring your best.
Yeah.
And that's what athletes do, So whatever domain it's in, you're really bringing your best. So I want to ask you mainly about what similarities have you seen between, let's say, the top excellence of athletes coming through and the sales professionals, the executives, the entrepreneurs that you find? Like, what are some of those similarities that you see consistent regardless of sport or activity?
There's probably a list of about a dozen that we could get into, but I'd like to highlight the top three and what I actually believe are the three most important. And this unites, for the alliteration effect, I like to say, from basketball to business and everything in between. The first is a strong respect and reverence for the basics, for the fundamentals, that understanding that in the game of basketball, your footwork and your shooting mechanics and how you handle the ball, those are the basics and the fundamentals of the game. And if you want to be an elite level player, you have to work towards mastery of those fundamentals relentlessly during the unseen hours. That's how you become a good basketball player. Well, it's the same thing in business or any other area of life. You have to identify what are the basic building blocks, what are the fundamentals of fill in the blank, this craft that I need to work towards mastery of. So anyone that I've met that is a high performer in any area of life, they stick to the basics and they have a strong respect and appreciation for the fundamentals. The second thing that unites everyone from basketball to business is they've learned to earn their confidence through demonstrated performance, by getting in repetitions, by putting in work during the unseen hours. They've earned the right to be really confident, but they manage to brush that with an appropriate amount of humility, which is what keeps them open to feedback. It keeps them open to being coached. And most importantly, it keeps them open to wanting to continually improve and develop and evolve. So no matter how good someone is on the court or in the business world, they don't believe they've reached their full potential. They know that no matter how good they are, they can still get better. And that's a major driving force. And if you lack humility and you only have confidence, then you'll be closed off to feedback, to coaching, and ways to improve. If you only have humility and you have no confidence, then you won't have the requisite swagger to be really good at what you do. So it takes a marriage of the two. And then the third one is they have a strong appreciation for the process. They have a goal and it's crystal clear. They have a North Star that they're trying to pursue, and they use that to provide clarity and direction. But once they've crystallized that North Star, they take their eyes off of the prize and they put it on the day-to-day. They put it on the process, on the habits, on the micro steps, on the daily behaviors, on the mindsets that they need to inch closer to reaching that goal. So they've learned to somewhat untether from external results, if you will, and focus more on the process. They learn to love the work. As a basketball player, if you can learn to love practice and learn to love working out and learn to get in repetitions, learn to love that, then the game ends up being a reward. Playing in the game is simply the fun part. And if you do those things at a high level, then winning becomes a byproduct of sticking to the process. And, all three of those traits are things that I really try to model and live in my own life in everything that I do.
I love that, because I think it's, especially with the coachability factor, there's a lot of people, you would have seen this, of course, high school students who were naturally very good, really like great genetics, whatever, they have all the pieces, but they don't have the attitude piece, the coachability and the feedback ability. So maybe when they hit 21, 23, 25, they start to tether off. So do you think it's people then that really kind of capture that, take it forward, especially in a business sense? People can get knocked down, business fail or poor feedback, and then turn it into a positive. Like everything happens for you, not against you, essentially.
Most certainly, yes. That attitude is crucial, and it's just this love of the game and this love of improvement, this love of evolving. Like that's the driving factor. And it doesn't mean that they don't think external measurements and goals and results are important. I mean, those are important, but it's not what defines them. It's this process-oriented thinking. And for me, that has been one of the biggest changes, because I know in my own life, and I'll only speak in the first person, if you make the mistake of tethering your self-worth and your confidence to external results, then you're always going to be kind of on this roller coaster of emotions. I know from my own firsthand experience, because I used to do that, that would mean that when I'm achieving and when I'm hitting goals, I feel good about myself. And when I fall short or I'm not achieving, then I feel bad about myself. And that just causes this very inconsistent roller coaster. So for me, I try and derive satisfaction and fulfillment out of doing the best that I'm capable of with whatever I have, wherever I am. It's more about working towards self-actualization than any type of external measurement or result. And to me, that's been both liberating and empowering at the same time.
That's a very thin line as well, if you think about it, though, because I'm very much exact same. Like my podcast, with my business, with my life, with my career. When things are going well, you ride that wave, and then when it goes negatively, you can get you can seep into it a small bit, and I guess athletes have it too. So you know, during that period, like where do you draw the line between like success and failure? Where are the metrics that you need to lean into? Otherwise, we're going to fall into aspects of being stressed, overwhelmed, burnt out. We push too far to reach these achievements.
Yeah. Well, so for me personally, I mean, to help clarify my terminology, I have preferences, so
Hmm.
I'm the author of two books, Raise Your Game and Sustain Your Game. Now, it would be my preference that both of them sell millions of copies. It would be my preference that both of them are New York Times bestsellers. It would be my preference that Oprah Winfrey would call me and want to put me on her show to talk about my books. Those are preferences,
Yeah.
and those are okay to have. But I don't let those define whether or not I'm proud of the books that I've written, whether or not I actually believe the books are good.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between the two. Even with this podcast right now, with your show, my goal, and I assume your goal, is for us to have a fun, impactful conversation that adds value to the people that are listening. That
Hmm.
to me is what's most important, and that's what I would measure the success of this interaction we're having on. When you hit stop record, did you and I both give our best effort to have a fruitful and meaningful and memorable conversation? And if we did, then I think that was a success. We don't necessarily have control whether or not 10 people listen, 10,000 or 10 million. That's kind of outside of our sphere of control. Now, we have preferences. I'm sure you would prefer that 10 million people listen instead of 10. Shoot,
Yeah.
I would too. But that's not going to be what defines whether this was a good conversation. One of the examples I use all of the time in the game of basketball, a good shot is determined the moment it's taken. It has nothing to do with whether or not the ball goes in the basket. A good shot is a shot that you're relatively open, you're in range. According to time and score, it's an appropriate shot to take. So the moment you take the shot, a coach should be able to say whether or not that was a good or bad shot. And sometimes you miss good shots. And then other
Hmm.
times a player can take an awful shot. They've got two people guarding them. They're 30 feet from the basket. Their head is down and they just throw up a prayer and it happens to go in. Well, just because it went in doesn't mean it was a good shot. That was a really poor shot to take. That was a bad decision, a bad basketball decision. It just happened to go in. So this is another example of, we don't let the result, whether the ball goes in the basket or not, has nothing to do with whether it's a good shot. And it's the same thing in
Hmm.
all of these different areas. As a keynote speaker, I want to make sure that I do everything in my power to be fully aligned with the client that I'll be speaking with, to do my due diligence and learn everything about their audience, their challenges, their pain points, and what they really need to hear. I want to customize a program that's going to be very meaningful and impactful for them. I want to go through the proper preparation that I need to, so that when I step on stage, I am full of energy and I'm fully prepared to deliver the best keynote I'm capable of doing. If I can do
Hmm.
all of those things, then I believe that keynote was a success. I don't control whether or not the audience liked it or whether I get a standing ovation or anything like that. Now, once again, those are preferences. Of course, I
Hmm.
would prefer that the audience loved every word that I say. I would prefer that everyone jumps up immediately to give me a round of applause when I'm done speaking. Those are preferences, but the preferences, I won't allow my preferences to dictate whether or not I feel it was a success and I did the best that I'm capable of. And this shift has been really, really helpful in my own life.
Mhm. It's pretty much like getting the right metrics aligned instead of just saying we want 1,000 downloads or 1,000,000 downloads. It's the metrics that actually matter that would lead to the self actualization, the better control, the better. I think you have a better understanding of what's kind of happening, and you really feed into the kind of Jocko Willink aspect of extreme ownership, like taking real ownership of what's within your control. And I think everyone can put their hand up and say like what they did right, but people don't necessarily identify what they could have done better or what could have been within their control. how has that even been an influence for you? Because I know you even spoke about Jocko previously. Has it been a big part in terms of like how you coach people, even younger people who may have a chip on their shoulder, a bit of an ego, and then you're trying to get that kind of process through them to say, look, just fall into the process, fall in love with the process, get better as time goes on, and take ownership for what happens to you.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much gold in what you just shared there. And I'm going to pull on a few of those threads. One, yes, as a general rule in my life, I try to place the vast majority of my focus and attention and energy into the things I have control over, which
Hmm.
for the most part is my own effort and my own attitude. Now, I don't want this to be a game of verbal semantics. I do believe you can take effort and attitude, mix them together, and you have preparation. Yes, I'm in control of how prepared I am in any situation. You can take effort and attitude, mix them together, you have enthusiasm. I'm in control of how much enthusiasm I show in any given situation. But those are really just spokes off of the same wheel. Really, it just comes down to effort and attitude. And that's what I want to make sure that I'm trying to maximize as consistently as possible. Now, with that said, I don't believe there is anything, I don't believe that perfection is attainable. I don't think perfection should be the goal for any of us. For me, I'm much more inspired by progress than I allow myself to get stifled by perfection. So the reason I say that, I mean, I have never and will never deliver a perfect keynote. I have never and will never write a perfect book. But can I write the best book I'm capable of at that time? Can I deliver the best keynote that I'm capable of at that time? Absolutely. And that's the measuring stick. Now, I do believe in constant progression and development and improvement and evolution. So when I'm done giving a keynote, even if I felt like I rocked it and it went really well, I can absolutely go back and watch the video and take some notes on some things that I know that I could do better. Maybe I could have emphasized this one point with a better story, or maybe I could have had better timing or rhythm at another. So those things can always be improved. And when appropriate, I also hire coaches to help me see things that I can't see and get them to help, in this case, break down a keynote and offer their expertise. Because I know that I have some blind spots as I'm watching myself on film, and they'll see some things that I'm not capable of seeing in the moment. So I do believe in consistently trying to level up. I just don't let the lack of perfection stifle me. My first book, Raise Your Game, came out in 2019. I'm very proud of that book. It was the best I was capable of writing at that time. It's been almost 5 years since that book came out. So I can go back and look at parts of it, and absolutely now I know I could do better. Well, that's because it's been, 4 years since it came out. It's, I've grown, I've learned. There are a couple of things in that book, that maybe aren't as accurate as they would be today if I gave them a slight update. And that's okay. I don't allow that to diminish what I created at that time. And I think this balance between giving your best effort, focusing on what you have control over, doing the best you can with what you have where you are, but then still being open to knowing that no matter what that is, you can still make some improvement. To me, that's what makes this fun. That's the game that we're all playing.
And it's what makes it process driven and evolutionary, because the goal is not to be perfect, the goal is to get better.
Yes.
That's the process over time. And it takes a lot of screwing up and messing up to even come to those realizations. It takes that kind of time. But a question for you off that is that you write a lot about stress, and I feel like people put these pressures on themselves to not necessarily be perfect, but to get things right or to do more in their work. So like, what element of stress have you seen people kind of push a bit too far on? Like, do they get too overwhelmed with this stuff, especially in an entrepreneurship sense, or trying to be like, a very senior member of a leadership team or whatnot?
It's been my experience that the vast majority of stress is self-induced. Now, just to make a distinction, there are biological stress responses that are uncontrollable and unconscious. If you're walking across the street and a car is coming at 60 miles an hour and slams on the brakes and is like 3 inches from hitting you, a stress response will be, you will feel a rush of adrenaline. You will feel your heart start to pound, your armpits and your palms will start to sweat. Like, there's a variety of biological stress responses that we don't have control over. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this kind of this mantra of just feeling stressed, and people walking around in their daily lives saying all the time, I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. My boss has me stressed out. My kids have me stressed out. So in that context, I believe the vast majority of that is self-induced. And the reason I believe that was I had heard a quote from from Eckhart Tolle, who, for lack of better words, is a modern day philosopher. And his definition of stress is the one that has most resonated with me and really changed my perspective on how I viewed it. And his definition of stress was that stress is the desire for things to be different than they are in the present moment. Like, that's it. Stress comes from our desire for things to be different than they are right now. So our stress comes not from the external events and circumstances and what people say and what people do. Our stress comes from our resistance to those things. So when we fight against reality, when we push against what is, that's what creates our stress. So there is nothing inherently stressful about sitting in traffic when you're late for a meeting. The stress comes from the desire for us not to be sitting in traffic late for a meeting. If you learn to have a level of acceptance and a level of surrender, and you allow certain things to just kind of flow through you, then you dissipate stress immediately. So I find that incredibly liberating and empowering, because this means that for the most part, I can control my stress level by having a level of acceptance. Now, this piggybacks perfectly onto what we were talking about before, about preferences. Once again, I have preferences. It is my preference to never get stuck in traffic. It is my preference for every car in the world to get out of my way so I can get wherever I'm going as quickly as possible. That is a preference. But I've come to the conclusion, and I say this with a huge smile because it only took me 4 decades to come to this conclusion, that it is not the universe's job to conspire to make me meet all of my preferences. It is not the universe's job to make my life easy and fluid every moment of every day. It is not the universe's job to make Alan Stein Jr. happy every second of every day. It is my job to be reflexive enough to adapt to whatever the world throws at me to navigate my own life in this world. So it's not the universe's job to get every car to get out of my way so I can make it to my appointment on time. It's my job to handle when there is traffic in my way. And this absolutely goes back to Jocko's mindset of extreme ownership. I recognize that the vast majority of things that happen in and around my life, I have no control over, but I absolutely have control over how I choose to process them, my perspective of them, and how I choose to respond accordingly. And I make sure that I hold myself fully accountable for my responses and my decisions.
They're all so interrelated. That's why I'm smiling, because the stress element is so funny, because people are always looking for the next promotion, the next job, the next client, whereas like at the in that moment they're pretty well connected. They're well off. They're not desperately needing food or shelter or whatnot, so their stressors can actually be a lot lower. But people put that external pressure on themselves, and it all factors in together. It's like one loop essentially coming through. And I think that quote is actually fantastic, but I feel like everyone can take that responsibility themselves to maybe go maybe a little bit softer on their short-term targets and then harder on their long-term targets. And I know you span out short and medium and long-term goals. So I think there is that kind of element of, if we understand what's possible in the long run and what we need to do in the short term to extrapolate to that stage,
Yes.
maybe it becomes a bit more manageable. How do you think about running those kind of short and long-term objectives and goals?
Well, I love that that's the direction you went. I'm going to put a pin in that for 1 second, because there's 2 disclaimers that I want to make about everything we've been talking about, just to make sure that those watching and listening have everything in context. First is, everything that you and I are discussing right now is very basic in principle. It's very basic in theory, but none of this stuff is easy to do. And I don't want to make it sound like for 1 second that any of the things we've been talking about are easy, but they are basic. And it's important to discern the difference between the two, because people often use those words basic and easy as if they're synonyms, as if they mean the same thing, and they don't. They have very different meanings. The other thing I want to make sure everyone understands is I'm not coming from a place of mastery on any of this stuff. anything that I share on stage, I share on page, or I'm sharing with you right now, I have not mastered. Now, I've made progress in these areas, and I'm very proud of the progress I've made, and I'm proud of the path that I'm on, but I am not a master of any of this. So I don't want to make it sound like for 1 second that I don't still allow myself to feel stressed. There are still times where I'm resisting what is, and I'm inducing stress in myself. What I am proud of is I have a much higher level of awareness now that when I find myself stressed, I catch it much quicker. And I remind myself, Alan, you're causing this stress right now. You're causing, you're the one choosing to be upset by the fact that you're sitting in traffic. If you want, you can simply smile and turn on a podcast, or maybe do a quick meditation, or just enjoy some stillness, or maybe call a friend. Like, you don't have to be upset by the fact you're sitting in traffic. You're choosing to be upset. And it's that awareness that has allowed me to quickly course correct. So anyone listening, just know that if you find yourself getting stressed out, if you find yourself pushing against reality and what is, it means you're human. That is part of the human condition, and give yourself some grace, because I certainly haven't mastered this. Eckhart Tolle is a lot further down the path than I am. And I'm willing to bet if he was on your show right now, even he would say he hasn't fully mastered it. Now, he has a better grasp of it than most of us, but life is not a game that you master. Just like we were saying before, life is not a perfection game. Same thing with basketball. So I did want to make those disclaimers. Now, back to.
But again, it's about doing the simple things right, though, isn't it? Trying to get the simple things right. Simplicity is better. It's not easier, but it's just a better path to take than a convoluted, confused, like emotionally charged lifestyle, which I'm not there as well. Trust me, couldn't be further apart from it at the moment.
No, and I know, and like anything, it will ebb and flow. There are some days where I do a pretty good job of this, and then there are other days where I don't. There's some other days where I'm not consistently the best version of myself. I do get frustrated or agitated or irritated. There are days where I inadvertently kind of skip over the basics and then end up, paying the consequences of doing that. What I think is very in line with what we're talking about now, and then I will get back to your timeline question. I heard another phrase, a quote, and this was a couple years ago, that had a massive impact on me. And that is, our emotions are designed to inform us. They're not designed to direct us. And ultimately what that means is we should be open to all of the different emotions that we feel, even the unpleasant ones. I mean, I don't think it's anyone's preference to feel frustrated, agitated, annoyed, disappointed, but those are part of our humanity. That's part of what makes us sentient beings, is we feel a wide array of emotions. And it's okay to feel those things. Where we have to be really careful is not letting those emotions dictate how we treat others, how we behave, the decisions that we make. So that's another area that I'm making progress in. I'm not at the top of the mountain yet, but I'm making progress. That I allow myself to feel however I'm feeling, but I don't allow how I'm feeling to dictate the decisions I make, how I behave, and how I treat others. So there, to be able to acknowledge that, hey, I'm a little irritated and frustrated right now, but I'm not going to treat others poorly because of it, is a massive step in the right direction. Because most people, understandably, I say this with all the compassion in my heart, they let their feelings and emotions dictate how they're treating others. When they're in a bad mood, they're in a bad mood because they're rude, they treat you poorly, that's how they behave. And my goal is to be able to separate those things, is to give myself permission to feel however I'm feeling. So I do not believe in resisting or suppressing or ignoring emotions. It's just data. And there's nothing wrong with feeling frustrated biologically. I mean, it's not a pleasant feeling, but there's nothing wrong with it. I just don't let that in turn, dictate the way that I lead and the way that I communicate and the way that I navigate. So that separation is another really important one. And I can now have the awareness to know, okay, Alan, I can tell you're in a little bit of a mood right now. You're a little frustrated. You're a little irritated. Maybe you heard some bad news or something that temporarily knocked you off your game. Just be very careful in how you behave moving forward. And for me, one of the most important traits that I hope to model and embody is one of consistency, is to say that it doesn't matter what's going on in my life at present. I made a commitment to you to be on your show and do the best that I'm capable of to add value and have a great conversation. So You have no idea whether or not I've had a wonderful morning or a frustrating morning, because I'm not going to let that show in how I choose to be a part of our interaction today. And to me,
Mhm.
being able to consistently perform at a high level, even when you don't feel like it, is the marker of a professional. And I
It's
very
the
much
athlete.
consider myself a
It's
pro.
that it's that athlete, man. You know, showing up on the court, on the pitch, on the training, whatever, and you see it between the best of the best and people that are not so much the best. You know, so you can see the difference in it, the emotions. Some guys just show up. Maybe it could have been Michael Jordan, whatever, and they're the same. They're just consistently at it, moving up that process.
Yes, well said. Now, back to your timeline. Um, the way that I wrote Sustain Your Game, there were kind of three timelines that we looked at. We looked at stress, which is kind of in the moment, the day to day, something I know everybody's familiar with. Then we looked at kind of this mid stretch area. And I don't want to necessarily put time parameters on it, because that stretch area could be a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or it could be a couple of years. But it's usually when we start to allow stagnation to set in. It's been my personal
Mhm.
experience, as well as the experience I've observed in others, that stagnation usually hits when we've reached a certain level of success and we inadvertently and unconsciously put on the cruise control and just say, what I've been doing is good enough. I'm just going to keep riding this out. I don't need to get better because this is good enough. And
And why is that?
well, I think it's an innate human quality that when we've reached a certain level, that we don't feel the need to keep pushing and growing. I think that's something we
Mm.
actually have to be very conscious of, continuing to stimulate and being able to balance, and know the difference. If we're going to talk terminology, the difference between contentment and complacency. I am very content in my life at present. I have a wonderful life. I've got 3 kids that I love more than anything in the world. I've got my health and my wellness. I have a vocation and a job that I absolutely love and feel great about. Like, I am very content in my life, but I'm definitely not complacent. I have not arrived, and I don't want anybody putting me under museum glass. I will continue to be a work in progress. I will always be under construction. So I'm motivated and inspired by becoming a better father, by becoming a better keynote speaker, by becoming a better author, to show up as a better guest on somebody else's podcast. While I'm content in my life and have some satisfaction and fulfillment in my life, I'm not allowing myself to put on the cruise control and just ride
Mm.
that out. And that's usually what happens in that midterm. And then what I've experienced as well, and have observed, that when you have an accumulation of both stress and stagnation, when you combine those two things, that puts you on the path to burnout. And that's more in the long term. Once again, I don't want to put timestamps on it, because someone can get burned out having only had a job for 2 years. Someone can be burned out in their early 20s. It's not something that is reserved for people that are in their 70s and 80s and have been working the same job for 50 years. Any of us can experience burnout. And I found that burnout is a misalignment between the sacrifices you're making and the work you're putting in, and the meaning that you find in the work that you're doing. It's not
Mhm.
just from long hours. It's not just from making personal sacrifices. That's part of the equation. But when you're putting a ton of time and effort into something and you don't find it meaningful, you're not connected to the real purpose behind what you do. That's when you're at risk at burnout. I work really hard at my craft, but I find so much purpose and meaning in what I do that at present, I'm not at risk of burnout. Now, that may change over the next 5, 10, 20 years. If for some reason I allow myself to drift away from my meaning and purpose. So, of course, my goal is to keep every day refocusing that lens to make sure that doesn't happen.
It's very interesting you say that, because you see it often in like careers like finance, technology, guys who are just like smart engineers or smart managers, and they just ended up managing these teams and they just didn't really like it. There's no fulfillment in it. They're being told to do a load of shit, work super long hours, give up all different elements of their life. And then they have that element of high stress. Maybe there's a career progression there. Maybe they've stagnated at a managing director or whatever, and then they've hit burnout. And that's very, very interesting, because in contrast, I even find myself, I love my podcast. It's like you love your speaking.
Yeah.
I can get up and do this all the fucking time. Like I can record 4 days a week, 5 days a week. I'll be exhausted from it. Whatever, that's fine. Wake up, go to gym, reset, good food, and you feel better to do it. It's weird though, isn't it? It's not a weird concept. And of course you can burn out from it, but it's very much driven behind that purpose element.
Yes. And what's most important is understanding the difference between function and purpose. You know, the function of the chair that you're sitting in right now is to provide somewhere for you to sit. The purpose of that chair is to provide you comfort. See, one of them has a much deeper meaning than the other. And if we play on the surface and think more along the lines of a place for me to sit, that doesn't have the same deep requisite meaning as a place for comfort. You know, you recording this podcast, you know, you're not doing it just to record a podcast. You're doing it because you get fulfillment from sharing what it is that you share. You get fulfillment from having guests on and having invigorating conversations and learning new things. You get fulfillment because you know that someone listening to this is going to make an improvement in your life, and your show was the conduit to doing that. So as long as you keep staying connected to those things, then yeah, you'll be able to crank out 4 episodes, even if it is exhausting. But as soon as you start to drift away from that and you don't find meaning in it, and it's just, oh, I've got to record another podcast, or, hey, I promised I would always do one per week. I don't have one for this week, so I got to do it. It's kind of the get tos versus the have tos. You know, you can look at it as I have to record a podcast is a very different perspective than, oh my gosh, I get to record a podcast. Those things, you know, being able to discern between the two of those is a big portion of what we're talking about here with purpose.
100%. It's the I get to do this, I have this opportunity versus oh, this is a drag. You know, this is the drag that's on the back of my life. Before we finish up, I want to ask around how do we combat burnout and how do you stop it actually? How do you recognize and stop it before it happens? And then what do you do then to combat it in that approach?
Well, I've always believed that the time to fix the roof is before it's raining. You know, if you
Yep.
wait until it's raining, you've got rain coming in your living room and it's too late then. So very similar to that, we need to do everything we can to proactively stay connected to our purpose and meaning, and that will help ward off potential burnout. We also need to make sure that we prioritize self-care, you know, that we're getting adequate sleep, we're eating a healthy diet, that we're exercising, we're taking care of ourselves, which will give us the energy to work long hours in something we find meaningful. So that's kind of how we ward it off. We can start to tell when it's approaching. There's a few things. One, if you don't simply find the same enjoyment that you found in your work years prior. You know, right now, you strike me as someone that is so excited to fire up the microphones, put on the headphones, and record a podcast. If you start to notice that you don't have that same excitement, you start to think, oh, I got to record a podcast later today. You know, that's a very important red flag that you're starting to approach that direction. Now, it's not always that cut and dry. And there may be a day where you're just feeling really tired and dragging and you don't really feel like doing a podcast. That doesn't mean you're burnt out. That means you're a human being. And during that day, you're just, you know, a little bit less motivated than normal. So I don't think anyone needs to ring any type of alarm when that happens, but just be cognizant of it. Because if you start to see that happening more frequently and consistently, then there's a good chance you're approaching burnout. The next thing you need to do is give yourself some grace and have an awareness of when you're feeling that. See, most people tend to think burnout is a sign of weakness, or they start to associate feelings of guilt or shame. Is like, you know, and I know I experienced this in the basketball world. I was starting to get burned out on training players, and there was some guilt involved because I'm thinking, you know, Alan, do you know how many people would love to do what you're doing right now, and you don't want to do it anymore? Like, what's wrong with you? You're allowing yourself to get burnt out on something that so many people wish they had the opportunity to do. But that's not really a fair comparison. I don't need to really concern myself with what others would be like, you know, what they would like to do. I just needed to connect with myself that I was starting to experience burnout. And that awareness is crucial because we'll never fix something we're oblivious to, and we'll never improve something we're unaware of. So being aware of the fact that we're approaching burnout is what will allow us to make some shifts. And when that does start to approach, then we either need to find a way to get connected, reconnected back to our meaning or purpose, or sometimes we have to make some pivots. Some of these can be very small, minor tweaks and pivots, Maybe you work on a different project, or you ask if you can work, in a different department at your job, or maybe instead of doing a weekly podcast, you decide to do a weekly video blog, or you write a blog, or you decide to make a minor tweak or pivot and see if that re-sparks the love. And then sometimes we have to make a much more drastic pivot. Mine is a perfect example. I decided to leave the basketball training space entirely because I was approaching burnout, and refocus on becoming a performance coach in the corporate world, becoming a keynote speaker and author. So for me, I tried to do some of the small minor tweaks and pivots, and I still didn't get the love back in the training space. So I had to make a much more drastic move to become a corporate keynote speaker.
And I love that. I think that's it's really, really, really insightful, because you were able to catch this before and make it better informed decisions before it forces you to do something drastic and irrational. So I think that
Yes.
there's a lot of lessons there to be learned. Now I could go for 4 more hours, and I'd love to go for 4 more hours, but I know we don't have the time today. Can you tell people where we can find your stuff, your book, all the links, any related, but who can connect with you, how they can connect with you, everything?
Absolutely. I wish we could talk longer as well. This was a lot of fun. My main website is alansteinjr.com. That has all of the information on my speaking programs. I also have a supplemental site, strongerteam.com, where I have information on my books, my podcast. I have an online course, and I do some exclusive one-on-one coaching. And then I'm very easily found, very accessible, and very responsive on social media at Alan Stein Jr. On Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If anybody listening to this or watching this, if you have a question, or you want to share something, or you just want to continue the discussion, just shoot me a DM on Instagram or on LinkedIn. I'm very good about getting back to people, and always love having conversations like this. You do a terrific job, and this was a lot of fun.
We'll do more sessions in the future, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.